echo in here is so.
All right, so Google Reader. Yeah, so obviously, I think most people in the tech scene had a strong attachment to Google Reader. But that's not where it was limited. Google Reader was very popular among a lot of different verticals. So basically, what I'd love to do is just start out cold. We only have 30 minutes and talk with Rob, who's kind of an expert on Google Reader somehow. Can you talk about how you became an expert, and also just in general, why did Google decide to close Reader?
Sure. Well, that's quite a distinction. I guess if I have any expertise, it was from writing about it. And actually, the way I found out about Google Reader was through these guys called the Share Bros. They're sort of a small and kind of crazy community. Some of them work at Rap Genius now, and they're kind of all over the country. And they had told me about how much they loved and respected Google Reader and had met a bunch of their friends online through that. So I started digging around and ended up writing a piece for BuzzFeed in last December, actually, before Reader was formally shut down, but already kind of vitiated, where I went and tracked down a lot of these people who had been using Reader for years and years and talked to them about why they liked it. And as you mentioned, I think it was big in the tech community as an RSS reader, but actually very big among these other communities all over the country and even the world as a sort of social network before Twitter or Facebook was popular. And to answer your second question, I think Google shut it down. We talked about this earlier. Sergey Brin said something like, Google's let 1,000 flowers bloom, and now we need to trim them into a neat bouquet, which is a funny way of putting it. But I think Google had too many products and kind of looked at the ones that didn't have 10 million users and chopped those off. And it wasn't necessarily the most thoughtful way to shutter properties, but in the end, Reader was on the chopping block.
All right. Andrew, do you agree with this?
No, it's horrendously wrong in every respect. No, of course that's right. Rob wrote a really great piece, actually. But what I think is interesting is to think about. So I was at Google and was a pre-launch beta user before it even went public, and I've probably been like a daily user ever since. And what I think is interesting is, so the reaction of a lot of people is like, why would they kill it? Like, it doesn't cost much to run. They should just keep it sort of running indefinitely because people find it useful. And my guess, and I left at the end of 2008, but my guess is that for the last 3 years, it's been in zombie mode. In other words, they made the decision to kill it a long time ago, and they've kind of let it run for quite a while. But what happens is the back end changes. And when the back end changes, you actually have to invest in your front end products to make them work on the new infrastructure. And I bet that they're at one of those moments where it was basically like, we can't keep it running in zombie mode, so we have to sink some money into it if we're going to keep it going, and nobody wants to do that, so then they killed it. What I think is really interesting is to think about the kind of broader implications of what it means for a company like Google to keep something like Reader running, because what's been cool since they announced they're going to shut it down is that probably 10 companies have stepped up and started rapidly innovating, right? Rapidly rolling out new things. And so Google basically, because of the power of its infrastructure, the cost, the super low cost that it's able to deliver computing power and products, means that they can just suck the oxygen out of a space by running a product, and people just don't compete. So I think it's great. So now people are moving on to Bloglovin. Feedly's been rapidly rolling out new versions. Reader with 2 E's. We're going to build something. Prismatic's got something. There's just tons of people now trying to get into the space, and the users will benefit from much better readers with a wider diversity of offerings. And I don't think that means you should regulate Google and keep them from offering free things where there could be competition. But it does show you what happens when a kind of a huge giant just kind of sleepwalks their way through a product year after year. It can really be harmful to that space.
So just real quick on that, don't you think if they're kind of letting something stagnate for so long, shouldn't the market have replaced it much quicker than it did?
Well, it has kind of. I think Google Reader, over the years, has almost turned more into a API or a backend for other services. Because people wanted to read blogs when used on their phones. and Google Reader had a really bad mobile experience. So people were already moving over to Feedly or Reader and all these other platforms. They were just like powered by Google Reader, you know. And I don't know, maybe they didn't want to be, you know, that backend. And at the same time seeing usage decline, they might just, you know, shut it down.
Yeah. So my experience with Google Reader at first was using Google Reader, and then quickly I became just, I guess, annoyed by how it looked, and it just kind of was stagnating, and I ended up using Reader with 2 E's and Feedly, and they were kind of, Feedly was also powered back-end wise by Google Reader. So Mattias, can you talk about how you've benefited, how Bloglovin has benefited from the news that Google Reader is shutting down?
Right, so over the last, how long has it been? 6-7 weeks? Probably gone from 3 to around 5.2 million uniques across mobile and web. And it's like, I guess the people who's been coming to Bloglovin has been, you know, ex-Google Reader users that heard about the news and were looking, and usually they're like women or people who are interested in lifestyle topics, and you know, discovered Bloglovin through all the uproar of articles that came up around that time, you know, like about alternatives. And a lot of people come to Bloglovin because we also have this layer of discovery where you can also discover great content in, you know, like fashion or beauty or lifestyle, almost like tech meme for those topics. So we're really happy that they're shutting it down.
Yeah. So Mattias, you were just talking about discovery.
Yeah.
And with Bloglovin, it doesn't look anything like Google Reader. And one of the key aspects of it are discovery, and social aspects are becoming more and more important. Andrew, you probably, you found in your survey that social didn't matter to some, or the Google Reader users that replied.
Most people didn't remember ever using social features, right? So
it wasn't a top priority.
I mean, keep in mind, like, this is a self-selected group of people. It's not scientific. We have no idea who they were and whether they accurately remembered. But yeah, it seemed clear that for most of the people that use Google Reader now, which, by the way, may be people that, you know, excludes people that abandoned it years ago when the social features were killed because they cared about them. But anyway, for most people that use it now, they just want basically a power user experience, right? Follow my feeds, read the stories. I want to be able to plow through. And that is the kind of like default mode for Google Reader. It's like journalists and news junkies and analysts and people in industries for whom the news flow matters to their daily job. They jam through it. They don't really care much about chatting with their friends. And in part, by the way, the web has evolved so that those conversations around URLs, for example, happen on Facebook, and they happen in Twitter, and they happen elsewhere. So in other words, if you want to talk about a headline, you're going to go someplace else and not in Reader. Nevertheless, though, I do think that there's a case to be made that very simple, short conversations about stories that a defined group of people wants to share with each other is a pretty powerful need, and that there isn't really a good, satisfying way to do that out in the marketplace right now. Which is one of the things we're looking at, is to try to figure out how to make that, you know, how to make that happen without junking up or cluttering up the core reading experience, which is what matters to most people.
So I'm going to go over to Rob. What do you believe that the existing fleeing Google Reader user base needs? What do they need? Do they need social?
Well, I mean, I think it depends who you're talking about as your base. I think Andrew's absolutely right that there was a not large, but large enough number of people who were marginalized when social features on Reader were essentially replaced by Google+, maybe whatever it was 2 years ago. And those people fled. Some of them built their own replacements, but by and large, they were not, you know, I think the guys you're going after, at least initially. I think who Digg and some of the other entrants are looking at are the, you know, millions of people who are using RSS, or who are using Google Reader to comb through RSS feeds. And so I think building a really powerful baseline Google Reader replacement is a huge service and necessary. It's sort of a fundamental tool much like people use TweetDeck, I think, in a sort of, I think it straddles the line between a normal user and a power user where someone just wants basic headline flow through the web. So I'd say for a baseline product, that's necessary. I would agree with Andrew, though, as well, that social features, I think, could really make sense there. And I think when you look back at the history of Google Reader, it's one of the few kind of recent places where people actually like made new friends through a social network. I mean, when you talk about Facebook, you're more or less interacting with your existing friends, and Twitter, there's some sort of like professional community building. But with Reader, people were really meeting people, friends that, that they didn't know at all before. And I think that that's kind of a cool possibility.
So if Digg's Reader is going to look at social, is it going to be competing with Bloglovin?
So I don't know. I suppose in some ways, but the user, I suspect the user populations currently are very different. In other words, the people who go to, I suspect I don't know. We could oversimplify this a little bit, but I think what the existing user bases are different. Here's the underlying dynamic that makes that question kind of irrelevant, though, is there is a vastly rising tide of demand for reading, right, on mobile devices and on the web. Like, the amount of reading that's happening globally is increasing massively, and that's because online, and that's because there are more and more devices with more and more viable interfaces for reading, and more people are spending more and more time on them. And so the demand for reading and a great reading experience is basically surging. And so that's why there can be lots and lots of products and services that will coexist and operate in different ways. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if I could add on to that, if you look at a Facebook app or a Twitter app, the reading experience is really a kind of afterthought. You'll click a link in Twitter and it kind of opens a browser within the Twitter app, and it's not like a very elegant experience. So I think especially on mobile, all of you guys have a real opportunity to create something that's like native and a native reading experience for tablets and phones, which Google Reader never really had.
Yeah, and by the way, no coincidence that we just brought Instapaper into BetaWorks, right? I mean, like,
about to ask about.
No, I mean, these are pieces of the puzzle of building a really, really great reading experience, right? I mean, that's what we want to build, is something which handles feeds and the real-time stuff well. And BetaWorks built TweetDeck earlier, so we've been obsessed with this area as a firm for like quite a while. And what we see happening now is like the environment is providing a really nice moment. Google Reader is dying. Android fragmentation has finally gotten under control so that you can now design some really nice experiences on Android. iPhone continues to evolve in a way that is really friendly towards reading. There's a read it later use case. There's a show me my feeds use case. We see them fitting together quite nicely, and they're separate things, but they'll integrate together in a really elegant way, we hope, once we get done with our engineering.
But how does the read it later use case and the show me my feeds use case, how separate are they? Because it seems like they kind of overlap.
Yeah, they're not, they're separate. I mean, at least at the moment. I mean, I don't know where this will head years down the road, but for now, there are people who like to look at things in their browser, and essentially is almost like a guilt reduction mechanism. They like to be able to like open a tab and be like, oh, I should read that, and then they hit read it later, and they can forget about it and go on with their email or go on with whatever the main activity that they're doing is. So the notion of reading something later, I think, is powerful, will sustain a product like Instapaper, especially after we're done juicing up its feature set, improving its performance, and all the things that we're going to do to make it a better app. The feed reading experience is itself a core activity. Like, that's the thing that you want to do and then send stuff off to read later, for many users anyway. And so we're going to try to nail that, like be able to scan, be able to sort and rank things according to various criteria like popularity within your social circle, like interestingness based on the things that you have liked, favorited, tweeted, retweeted, blogged, reblogged, that sort of thing. And if we can allow people to boil down their feeds and then send over to a really beautifully optimized reading environment, those are two products then that like work nicely together.
I think there's something like like both me and Andrew, we aren't in the RSS reader business. We're in the business of helping people discover great content and helping them get that great content. And if you look at it that way, like Digg and Instapaper makes a lot of sense. But if you look at it as like an RSS reader and read it later feature, then I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and Mattias is, one of the differences between our approaches, which I think is like, interesting, is we're not really building something that's oriented around discovering. Bloglovin is very oriented around discovery. It's like you may go there, you want to go to Bloglovin and find stuff that you didn't even know you wanted. It's a big part of why you go there.
But Digg is also discovery.
Digg, the editorial part of the
Yes,
site is
the editorial.
absolutely. I mean, so that's why these pieces fit together very nicely, in my view, is that we've got editorially driven feeds that are, interesting in and of themselves. But for the reading experience that we're building, we are not at the moment focused at all on discovery. We're like, what feeds you want to follow. You want to manage those feeds. You want to be able to read in a really clean, uncluttered way with a lot of speed and performance. That's what we're optimizing for in version 1 of what we're building. And it's a different sort of thing. Like when I go to Bloglovin, it's oftentimes because I haven't the foggiest clue what I want to be interested by, and I will sort my way through and follow paths and see things that I didn't even anticipate. We're building more of like a production tool. You know what I mean? Like I know that I'm interested in the following 20 blogs, 30 news sites, and I want to be able to jam through it. And by the way, I often feel depressed and dispirited by the vast volume of things that I'm looking at. And so I would love to have some ways to sort and rank it so that I can just quickly look at the top things and then move on. That's the use case that we're doing. And it's just different from discovery.
But so I think Mattias thinks that, and I don't want to speak for you, but I'm guessing that you might believe that having these, like having, all right, feed reader, discovery through digg.com, and then read it later, it seems unnecessary to your strategy. And I feel like you're going in that direction because you don't believe it's valuable for at least your user base. Is it that the tech people, like the people who are really in the tech industry, they want that, productivity driven, let's, like I want all my feeds, et cetera. Is it just split? Is it just the tech that care about that? Or is it
Answer?
Yeah, go for it. You may actually want to.
Yeah, I think like tech and self-expression or more news-driven content and self-expression are like really different fundamentally. Like if you read, The Next Web, TechCrunch, Mashable, Reader Web, they'll produce tons of articles every day, and there are only that many that are interesting for you. So when you're reading a bunch of tech blogs, you just want to go through a bunch of posts fast and see what's good. You can like add it to your Instapaper, so you go back to read it. It's more of like task management. But when you're like a normal Bloglovin user, your average user follows 40 blogs, and those blogs, each blog updates around 5 times per week. So our user case is that people actually finish reading your posts, and all of them are kind of interesting. And then after that, they're like, oh, like I'm done reading, and I want to discover more great content. So it's fundamentally different user cases. And we're going to have completely different services and communities.
So do you think you don't compete with each other at all?
Not at the moment. By the way, we don't have a product yet, so.
So I want to get to that.
At some point,
I want to get to that.
we will not compete.
That's okay.
Even more directly.
The question is, which service is like John Borthwick going to use?
Well, the answer is both, right? Like the answer is it depends what you want to do. But there aren't hard lines here, right? But they are different vectors of direction, right? Right. Mattias is trying to serve the needs of users for whom the blogs are super high quality, very interesting. You don't have to follow that many of them to be interested, and you're going to want to branch out and discover new things based on what you've seen. And like we said, we're trying to build a production tool for like power users, and then build out from there. But we're going to try to nail that core use case initially.
So, Rob, what is the perfect Google Reader replacement? Which one?
A combination of Bloglovin and Digg? No. Which one?
I know you just said your product isn't out yet. The one I've been kind of mentioning as if it was already out. It's not out yet. But what is the perfect replacement?
I mean, I think that assumes that Google Reader was perfect, which it certainly wasn't. I mean, I think that the perfect product looks a lot different than Google Reader because Andrew's right. I mean, Google's product was stalled 4 years in the past, the guys who created it had left, the designers had left, the engineers had been poached. So, I think that it's been sort of beatified as this like, be-all, end-all product that it was never really was. I think that what a kind of modern day, semi-perfect, if you can get there, RSS reader looks like is something that is kind of cross-platform where you can very, very easily swipe through headlines quickly. What users and the people who created Google Reader talked to me about was this sort of one-to-one relationship between content and conversation in a way that exists on, I think, other networks. And I realize that people are you guys both are kind of moving away a little bit from the conversational piece, but they all spoke about the ease with which they could swipe through headlines. Like there were keyboard shortcuts. Over the years, they really built a lot of these features so that people even took pride in the number of items that they had read, and you would have, when they were shuttering Reader, people like made these t-shirts that said how many read items they had. And the fact that that became a pride point, I think, was important because it showed, not how many tweets you had, but literally I've ingested millions of pieces of content. So I think the perfect product will get at a very easy way to do that, but recognizing that, social channels are important now, make it equally easy to share those articles out and sort of give you a happy medium of like, I can read as much as I want very quickly and I can push that all out, the ones that I want as well.
Okay. So, of course, your product, Andrew, has not been released. What can you say about it now?
So we moved it onto production servers 2 days ago.
Okay.
We're racing towards a code complete date for the iOS app. So, we'll meet our goal of launching by the end of June.
End of June.
Yep.
Okay, and that's a great time to launch because
the shutdown is July 1st. Yeah. We're going to take every day that we think we can get and still leave people a little bit of time to transition over. But Digg is 2 back-end engineers, 2 front-end engineers, 1 iOS guy. And we're doing the Android sort of off to the side. That's the entire team that's working on this thing.
that's not is that separate or not separate from Digg.com?
That's everybody at Digg.com, right? So that is the entire engineering team. This is not like a heavily staffed thing. They happen to be phenomenally talented, but what we're aiming for is not to cover the waterfront on day one. We're aiming to build something which is very clean, very simple, very fast, and can handle the reading thing at the outset. And then we're going to start adding in features. We've got a long list of things that we want to play around with. In particular, it's different ways of distilling your feeds, sorting them and ranking them. And at the outset, we don't have any data. So we don't have the data that we will need to do some of the features that we want to add in later. We're going to have a sorting function at the beginning that's based on publicly available data that allows you to kind of like boil any arbitrary feed list down to a ranking that reflects popularity. And then we'll add more and more of these other ways of ranking. And the trick for us is to figure out the UX so that it's totally comprehensible what you're looking at, that you can understand why it's being shown in this order. But everything that we've seen, everybody that we've talked to says that a useful evolutionary advance on the Google Reader model would be to have alternatives to the relentless reverse chronological scroll. So I just think like psychologically, emotionally, people are tired of they just get tired of like scrolling through Twitter, scrolling through your feeds or whatever.
It's a task.
Yeah, and it would be nice if you could get, I think about this kind of like psychologically as sort of the Sunday newspaper thing where, you get the Sunday paper, you want to be able to like throw away some sections, keep the ones you want to read them, put it aside, you're done, you can mow the lawn, you can go to a movie, but you can feel like you're done. And I think Bloglovin actually does a nice job of pulling that off, but for most Google Reader users, they follow hundreds of sources, and they see thousands of things coming through their feed every day.
Yeah,
and they never get below 1,000 unread items. And so a useful service, and by the way, this is true for Instapaper too, as we look through the next revs of that product, that a lot of people use it as this mechanism where they're like, oh, I should read that, I should read that, I should read that. And you end up with like a 500 item queue, and you're like, ugh, and you never get down to things below your first 20 or most recent 20. So it would be nice if you could just like push a button, have it get sorted in some useful way, comprehensible way, and then give you at least some semblance of that feeling of completeness.
Rob, does that fall in line with how? Do you have
I'm looking forward to using it. I think I imagine speed has been a big challenge for you guys too, because one of the things when I talk to the Google engineers, I mean, doing this at scale is, I think you guys encounter that, or you might as well, like that it becomes a non-trivial problem, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we talked to the Bloglovin engineers and Google Reader engineers, and came away like deeply frightened. You know, like the amount of, you know, the amount of computing power that you have to throw at it is pretty daunting, and the amount of stuff that can go wrong is pretty impressive as well.
But I actually think it's a nice dovetail for Digg, especially because, you know, Digg used to have tons and tons of pages, and now it's this very kind of clean front page. And when they first told me about this, my thought was like, well, now you have this great front page, and the rest of the pages could be Reader. I mean, I don't know if that's the plan for you guys, but
Kind of what we're thinking.
yeah, I mean, to me that makes a lot of sense, you know, and it works.
So is there anything else you can share? You're talking about iOS, you're talking about mobile a lot for the new Digg Reader. Is it called the Digg Reader?
Yeah, we're just calling it Reader. You know, it's
Reader?
Digg. It's all Digg.
Is
It's,
it
it's,
with
it's one
Digg
download.
Reader?
Is it with 1 or 2 E's?
EA for trademark purposes. No, we're just calling it Reader. It's Digg Reader. But you know, you'll have one download, right, which is Digg.
Okay.
And the current Digg will have added onto it Reader capabilities. And it's, I gotta say, I was playing around with it earlier today. I think it's kind of great. It's really a very elegant, very simple, very clean design. And it fits very nicely with the existing aesthetic of Digg.
And is there a web component?
Yep, web, mobile,
Is that all coming out at the same time before July?
God willing.
God willing. We're just about out of time. I did want to ask Mattias, and I guess extend this to everyone else. What is, you know, like down the road, you know, we're talking about in a matter of weeks or days for
Weeks.
for Digg Reader. What is down the road the ideal situation? So for you, you were talking to me earlier about, you know, what is the future of Bloglovin. So what is the perfect reader next year?
Well, I think, first of all, like when Google Reader is shutting down, we're not talking about hundreds of millions of people that are, you know, jumping ship to somewhere else. It's like a few million people. And I think that says a lot about RSS as being, you know, somewhat tricky. You know, like everyone doesn't have those 30 blogs that they want to follow. And I think like where we're going with Bloglovin is to, you know, like we'll both have this like kind of like tool, RSS reader tool, where hardcore users can read all their favorite posts, but also have this kind of like discovery portal where people are just interested in fashion, want to see what's best in fashion or what's best in beauty. I think that's the, you know, 50 or 100 million user potential. When you can just, you know, have an interest and, you know, discover great content on your platform, that's when it gets really, really interesting. And like, yeah, we want those 100 million users.
Cool. So we're just out of time. Rob, Mattias, Andrew, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys coming up here and talking with us.
Thank you. Thanks
you.
for the moderation.